It was almost midnight when the front doors of the Shadowhounds clubhouse burst open with a loud bang. The room fell silent. The bikers had been in the middle of their weekly meeting, a gathering filled with the usual growls of laughter, clinks of coffee mugs, and the smell of old leather and motor oil. But that sound, that sudden crash, cut through everything like a blade. Every head turned, and there, standing in the doorway, was a barefoot boy, no more than 10 years old, covered in dirt, wearing torn pajamas, his face pale with terror. Blood trickled from one knee, and he clutched the side of the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping him from collapsing. His voice cracked as he yelled, "Please take me anywhere before they come." His words didn't make sense at first, but the fear in his voice was unmistakable. The clubhouse went still. Not a whisper, not a breath. 40 men in black vests and weathered jeans, covered in patches that told stories of loyalty, war, and years on the road, stared at this small, trembling child who looked like he'd stepped out of a nightmare. Mark Sullivan, the president of the Shadowhounds, and a man who had once survived roadside bombs in Afghanistan and gang fights in Chicago, stood up slowly. His voice was calm, measured, fatherly. "Easy, son. What's going on? Who's coming?" The boy looked around, wild-eyed, like he didn't trust anyone, but too desperate not to speak. "The men," he whispered. "They come at midnight. They said I was ready." And then he collapsed, right there on the concrete floor, shaking and crying so hard his little chest heaved with each breath. Mark knelt beside him and gently rested a hand on his shoulder. "What's your name, kid?" The boy wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Ethan," he said. "Ethan Carter." Mark nodded, keeping his voice steady. "Where do you live, Ethan?" The boy hesitated, then muttered, "Foster House, on Miller Lane, with the Thompsons. But you can't take me back. Please, they're selling me tonight." The room, once still, now felt heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Mark stood up slowly and looked around at his brothers. No one spoke. No one had to. They all felt it. Something in those words, in that child's broken plea, struck a nerve deeper than they expected. "What do you mean, they're selling you?" Mark asked quietly. Ethan nodded fast, too fast. "I heard them. They said the buyer would be there at midnight. They already sold 3 other kids. Tommy, Sarah, Marcus. None of them came back." A low growl came from Kenny, one of the older bikers near the bar. His fists clenched like he was holding back thunder. Mark looked down at his watch. 11:17. Just over 40 minutes. Mike, the club's tech guy, opened his laptop and started digging. "Greg and Linda Thompson," he muttered, "licensed foster parents for over 7 years, 4 kids in their care, no red flags, no complaints." Ethan interrupted. "3 now. I ran away." His voice was stronger this time, like saying it out loud gave him power. "They gave me special juice. I saw her put something in it. I didn't drink it. I poured it out. Then I heard Mr. Thompson on the phone. He said I was ready. He said the buyer was coming at midnight." He looked straight at Mark. "So I climbed out the window. I ran. I saw your bikes. Wolves protect things, right?" That last sentence hit Mark in the gut. This child had run blindly into the night, guided by nothing but instinct and hope. He'd seen the sign on the wall, Shadowhounds, with a wolf emblem painted beneath it, and decided this was his last chance. Mark stood tall and looked at the room. "Riders, we've got a kid who needs us. We don't know the full truth yet, but something's not right, and we're not sending him back into danger." There were no arguments, no hesitation, just a shared glance between men who'd seen too much of the world to ignore evil when it came knocking. They didn't know who was coming, but they knew one thing for sure. This boy was not going anywhere.
The clubhouse air was heavy, but focused. No panic, just the kind of silence that settles right before a storm. Mark stood by the window, the boy's words still echoing in his mind. Someone was coming to take Ethan. And not just anyone. People with money, with confidence, with plans. That meant danger. Real danger. Mark looked over at Kenny and said calmly, "Lock every door. No one in or out unless I say." Kenny nodded and moved fast. Mike was still typing, eyes glued to his laptop, pulling up every piece of public record on the Thompsons. Greg and Linda Thompson, he read aloud. Licensed foster parents for 7 years. They've had more than a dozen kids pass through their house. State records show glowing reviews. No violations, no red flags. He paused. Too clean. Ethan sat on a couch in the corner, wrapped in a thick blanket someone had handed him. His eyes followed every movement in the room, unsure whether to feel safe or more afraid. Mark walked over and crouched in front of him. "Son, I need you to tell me everything. Don't leave anything out." Ethan nodded and the words tumbled out fast, like he'd been holding them inside for too long. It started a few weeks ago. They were nice at first. Good food, let me stay up late, gave me a new video game. But then I noticed something. Kids started disappearing. Tommy was first. They said he ran away, but I saw them put him in a van. He was crying and tied up. That was 2 weeks ago. Then it was Sarah, then Marcus. I knew I was next. They started giving me more attention. They smiled too much, gave me things for no reason. Then, tonight, Mrs. Thompson gave me juice with white stuff in it. I saw it. I pretended to drink it but poured it in the sink when she wasn't looking. Then I heard Mr. Thompson talking on the phone. He said the buyer was coming at midnight, and the package was ready.
Mark stood up slowly. There was no doubt in his mind now. This wasn't just a scared child making up stories. This was a kid with the instincts of someone who'd had to survive too much too soon, and someone needed to pay attention. Mike turned his laptop around. "Still no official complaints, but I found some chatter on a parenting forum about kids placed there going missing. It got buried by state moderators. That smells like cover-up to me." Just then, Mark's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He clicked speaker. A deep, cold voice came through. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." Mark stayed silent. The voice continued. "The boy. Send him out, and no one gets hurt." Mark replied. "You picked the wrong clubhouse." The voice didn't flinch. "This isn't your business. You've got no idea who you're dealing with." Mark stared at the floor. "Try me." The call ended. No threat screamed, no drama, just cold professionalism. That was worse. That meant this was planned, organized, funded. Kenny stepped beside him. "Who is that?" Mark answered. "Someone who thinks kids are property." He turned to the room. "They'll be here soon, armed, ready. So are we." Mike checked his laptop. "I already called local police. Got put on hold 3 times. No response." Mark frowned. "That's not normal." Mike added, "It gets better. The Thompsons have connections. Greg worked part-time for the sheriff's department 5 years ago. Linda volunteers at the courthouse. If someone wanted to delay a call, they could." Mark took a deep breath. He'd seen corruption before, in war zones, in cities, even in people wearing uniforms. But this hit harder. This wasn't just about money or power. This was about a boy.
He walked over to Ethan and sat beside him. "They're coming," Mark said, "but they won't get to you. Not while you're under this roof." Ethan looked up with wide eyes. "They have guns," he whispered. Mark nodded. "So do we. But we've got something more powerful, too." "What's that?" Ethan asked. Mark smiled gently. 40 men who believe protecting you is worth everything." Ethan leaned against him, and for the first time since walking through that door, he didn't look terrified, just tired. Outside, the night was quiet, but not for long. Inside, Every man took his place. The shadow hounds were ready, not because they were outlaws, but because sometimes the people you least expect are the ones who stand between innocence and evil. And on this night, Mark knew one thing for certain. This child wasn't alone anymore. The silence outside was the kind that made your skin prickle. Mark stood by the main window, watching the long gravel road that led up to the Shadowhounds clubhouse. His watch read 11:48. The men would be here any minute, and they would not be knocking politely. He turned to his brothers, his voice steady. Everyone to positions. No one fires unless they force their way in. We are not starting a war, but if one begins, we finish it. Ethan was already in the basement, tucked behind two steel doors, guarded by two of the club's younger members. Mark had made sure of that himself. The rest of the club moved like clockwork, each man taking a place by a window, behind a wall, along the shadows of the building's frame. These were not street thugs. These were veterans, mechanics, ex-lawmen, and men who had seen enough of the world to know exactly what evil looked like. And tonight, they were staring it in the face. Then, the headlights came.
4 black SUVs rolled up slowly, like they had all the time in the world. They parked in a line, their engines humming low like a warning. The front doors opened, and men in dark tactical gear stepped out. Helmets, vests, radios, weapons. At least 20 of them. This was not a local operation. This was organized, trained, and dangerous. One man, taller than the rest, walked forward holding a megaphone. His voice was sharp, rehearsed. "We don't want trouble. Just hand over the boy and we walk away. No one needs to get hurt." Mark stepped forward just enough to be heard through the locked door. "That child is not yours to take, and this is not your playground." The man with the megaphone didn't flinch. "You're harboring property that was legally placed in the care of the Thompsons. We're authorized to retrieve him. Do not interfere." Mark raised his voice, firm but calm. "He is 10 years old. He is not property, and you're not getting him." There was a long pause. Then the man spoke again, this time louder. "We have 2 minutes. After that, we come in." Mark stepped back inside and closed the door. He looked at Mike. "How long has it been since you called the FBI?" Mike replied, 12 minutes. No confirmation yet. No one is answering the main line." Mark nodded. "Keep trying. Try the field office. Try the tip line. Try anyone who is not on the take." Kenny stood nearby, rifle slung across his chest. "Mark," he said, "even if backup comes, they won't make it in time." Mark gave a slow nod. "Then we hold." As the 2-minute mark approached, the men outside began to form a tactical line, weapons ready. Mark's fingers tightened. He remembered being overseas, holding the line in a remote village, protecting a school from insurgents. That same feeling sat heavy in his chest now. Not fear, not anger, just clarity. Innocence was behind that wall, and evil was standing outside. Then it happened.
Before the armed man could make a move, a distant rumble filled the night. At first, it was a low vibration. Then it grew louder, sharper. Engines. Dozens of them from both ends of the road, headlights emerged from the darkness. Motorcycles, at least 70, roaring down like thunder. The cavalry had arrived. Mark had triggered the emergency signal to Allied clubs hours earlier. He hadn't known how many would respond. Now he knew. Riders from 3 states came in formation, surrounding the SUVs, cutting off any path of retreat. The tactical men outside froze. Their radios lit up with panic. The lead man shouted into his mic, "We're surrounded!" But then from somewhere in the chaos, a shot rang out. No one knew who fired first, but once it started, there was no going back. Gunfire erupted across the parking lot. Windows shattered. Sparks flew from motorcycles and trucks alike. Some bikers returned fire. Others shielded the clubhouse, making sure no one got close. Inside, Mark made his move. He ran down to the basement, grabbed Ethan, and wrapped him in his arms. "Time to go, kid," he said. "Close your eyes." He carried Ethan through a side exit where Mike had a motorcycle waiting. The boy clung to him as they sped into the dark, the wind whipping their faces. Behind them, sirens finally wailed in the distance. Law enforcement was coming. Real law enforcement, hopefully not compromised. As they rode, Ethan whispered, "Are we going to be okay?" Mark didn't hesitate. "We already are." And as they disappeared into the night, leaving the chaos behind, Mark knew something had shifted. A group of men who had once only been known for their leather jackets and loud engines had just drawn a line in the sand between innocence and exploitation, and they were ready to defend it with everything they had.
The road away from the clubhouse felt longer than it really was. Mark rode through the night, with Ethan tucked tightly behind him, the boy's arms locked around his waist, his head resting against the back of Mark's jacket. Neither of them spoke. The roar of the engine was the only sound between them, drowning out the echoes of gunfire still ringing in their ears. Mark's mind was sharp, focused. He didn't know how far the corruption went or who else was involved. All he knew was that he had to get this boy somewhere safe, somewhere out of reach. He drove for almost an hour, winding through quiet back roads until they reached a small hospital 2 towns over. A place far enough away from the scene, but with staff Mark knew he could trust. Ethan was admitted immediately. He was dehydrated, underfed, and emotionally exhausted. But he was alive, and for the first time in what must have felt like forever, he was safe. While doctors examined the boy, Mark made phone calls. Real ones. Not to the local sheriff's department, not to a county hotline, but directly to the regional field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He didn't ask for favors. He told them what he knew, what he'd seen, and what they would find if they acted quickly. And for once, someone listened. By sunrise, federal agents had arrived at the Shadowhounds clubhouse. The standoff was over, but the evidence left behind was undeniable. 14 of the armed men who had arrived in those black SUVs were arrested on the spot. 9 bikers were wounded, but not a single one had died. The clubhouse was damaged, but still standing, just like the people inside it.
That same morning, another team of agents raided the Thompson house on Miller Lane. Hidden files were uncovered, financial trails were followed, and what they found was more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Records showed that over the course of 5 years, Greg and Linda Thompson had trafficked at least 23 children through the foster care system. The operation spanned 6 states and involved dozens of individuals, some posing as foster parents, some working inside the very system meant to protect those children. 2 social workers were arrested. 1 family court judge was placed in handcuffs before noon. Mark had suspected corruption, but he had not imagined it went that far. And yet, thanks to Ethan's courage, the entire network began to unravel. Within a few weeks, the 3 missing children Ethan had spoken about, Tommy, Sarah, and Marcus, were found alive. Each had been sent to different states, living under false names with people who had no business caring for anyone. The trauma they carried would take time to heal, but they had a second chance now, and so did Ethan. The truth was, Ethan had no one left. His biological parents had passed away in an accident 2 years earlier, and no known relatives had stepped forward. For most children, that would mean returning to the same broken system, but Mark refused to let that happen. Just days after the raid, he and his wife Angela filed for emergency foster placement, and 6 months later, after background checks, home visits, and a mountain of paperwork, the adoption was finalized. Ethan Carter officially became Ethan Sullivan. Life didn't magically become perfect overnight. There were still nights when Ethan would wake up shaking, calling out in fear. There were moments when sirens in the distance made him flinch, or when someone spoke too loudly and he instinctively backed away. But over time, something remarkable happened. The bruises healed, the panic softened, and the nightmares began to fade.
He got a room of his own, painted with deep blues and glowing stars on the ceiling. He learned how to ride a bicycle on the driveway behind the clubhouse. He grew stronger, bolder. He started to smile more often. And one day, while watching the shadow hounds clean their bikes before a long ride, he said, "I think I want to be one of you someday." Mark smiled and replied, "Kid, you already are." The world never heard about what happened that night. There were no headlines, no interviews, just paperwork, closed files, and sealed courtrooms. But the people who mattered remembered. A group of leather-wearing, gravel-voiced men became something more than what the world thought they were. They became guardians. A child who ran from monsters found a family instead. Not a perfect one, but a loyal one. Ethan had trusted strangers to protect him when no one else would, and they did. They didn't ask for thanks, they didn't want medals, they just did what was right. Because sometimes the scariest-looking people are the safest ones to run to. And on one cold night in rural America, a frightened boy chose wolves over monsters, and for the rest of his life, he never had to run again. If you believe that real strength is standing up for the vulnerable, if you believe that brotherhood means something, then stand with us, share this story, and never forget what can happen when ordinary people choose to protect.